Morning, everyone. My name is Boitumelo Machaba. I am a heritage officer for the South African National Parks under the Cultural Heritage Unit. My presentation today will be an overview of the rock art and the rock art sites we have within our national parks. I'll also touch on the threats and challenges in preserving the art and some of the mitigation measures we've put in place for that. I'll also share a case study of a rock art trail as a means of preserving the sites that we have. All right, I'd like to start by just giving everyone an overview of our national parks throughout the country. We have 21 national parks that cover 7 provinces out of the 9 that we have in the country. So in the Limpopo province, we have 3 national parks, which include Mabungubwe National Park, as we know it as the first Southern African kingdom in the country, with Mabungubwe Hill and the discovery of the royal graves and the golden collection. We also have to the west of the province, Marakele National Park, which has heritage resources, including Botswana Iron Age sites. And we have the northern part of the Kruger National Park. The southern part of the Kruger National Park extends to Mpumalanga province, and then to the central region of the country, we have Golden Gate Highlands National Park, which is renowned for its paleontological history, where a site was discovered to have a cluster of dinosaur eggs. Now, the site has since been declared a National Heritage Site, and there was the establishment of Kodumudumo, a Dinosaur Interpretation Center. And then the concentration of the rest of our national parks are throughout our coastal provinces. In the Eastern Cape, we have about 4 national parks, which include Ado National Park on the coast, and some of the heritage resources there are colonial historical sites and marine archaeology. We have Mountain Zebra, which also has historical colonial sites and rock art sites, which I'll touch on. You also have Tamdebu National Park and Tsitsikamma National Park. And then to the Western Cape, where most of our national parks are, we have about 7. So that includes Wilderness to the coast, Agulhas National Park, Table Mountain as we know it, West Coast, Bontebok, and Karoo National Parks. Most of them include historical colonial sites. And then the last province is where we are, the Northern Cape, and we have about 6, if I'm not mistaken. So I'll start to the south of the province. We have Tankwa Karoo National Park, and then towards the Atlantic, we have Namakwa National Park, and a national park that borders the south of Namibia is Richtersveld National Park. We also have one that is Ochrabisfalls National Park. Towards the east of the province is Mogala, and lastly we have Kalahari that borders both Namibia, and we share some of the biodiversity with Botswana. I'd also like to move on just to share a bit about what the Cultural Heritage Unit does. So first is in the protection and management of cultural heritage resources within the parks, and that includes annual assessments in the national parks and monitoring of at-risk or sensitive sites. I've added a picture there of an example. This year we had an annual assessment at Richtersveld, and we were alerted of a grave that needed mitigation, and we had to relocate it. Something else that we do is community engagements. Most of our sites are still living landscapes and are held dear to our surrounding communities within the parks. I've added an example here of a site in the Kruger National Park where the community and the royal family visits the site. It's Thulamela National Heritage Site to perform rituals and appease their ancestors. Something else that we do is research and identification. Within our national parks, there is a continuation or a number of ongoing archaeological projects. And one of them is the Letaba Archaeological Project in the Kruger National Park that has yielded great analyses and results in relation to the Iron Age of the Kruger, but also the Southern African Iron Age. With regards to identification, part of what we do in our annual assessments is to identify sites with exceptional quality that we can put forth to be recognized as either local, provincial, or national heritage sites, and we have quite a few within the parks. Finally, I'd like to touch on tourism and accessibility. In identifying the sites, some of them are fit to be tourism products. And part of what we do is holding workshops and giving capacity building to field guides on interpreting and presenting the heritage sites we have within the parks. The example in the middle there is of a workshop we held in the Kruger National Park where we gave training to field guides on an Iron Age site there. I'd now like to move on to some of the motifs and the rock art that we have within the parks. So most of our concentrations is in animals. So we have a lot of animal paintings. In the north of the region, the SANParks region, most of our paintings are monochrome and include, majority of the paintings are colored red, but we also have paintings in black and in yellowish brown. And there's also a diversity of those animals. This is from Mapungubwe National Park. So there you would see rhino, you would see elephants painted, you would see various types of antelopes as we have here, and some giraffe too. And then when you move on to the interior of the country, namely Golden Gate, that's when you would see similarities with the rest of the landscape, the Maloti Drakensberg. So the first painting would be a great example of that. So many of the paintings are of eland, but we also have of others or of other animals represented. This one right here is also from Golden Gate. It's quite rare to see snakes represented in the art. I'm only aware of two within our national parks. The one in Mapungubwe has deteriorated, but this one in Golden Gate is still in great condition. We also have representation of cattle within our rock paintings. The second picture is of one found in mountain zebra. So in the park, you would we have rock art sites that depict contact period art. We also have representation of human figures in different forms, some in trance. For example, the first one, they're also really good ones clearly depicting gender, for example, you can distinguish. And others, you might argue, are therianthropes. And lastly, we also have engravings within our parks. Kruger National Park has a good concentration of them, but this one is found in the Richtersveld on the bank of a river. I'd like to now move on to the threats that we encounter with our rock art sites. And as our speakers from yesterday, even today, have mentioned, natural weathering is experienced in most, if not all, the sites, especially those that are not sheltered or are not in caves. Another one would be vandalism and graffiti. It has been mentioned before, we do experience it in our national parks. The first picture is Pierce Cave in Table Mountain, where the rock art has faded completely, and it's mostly due to vandalism, graffiti, and also man-made fire within the cave. The second picture is a depiction of a threat that I've yet to hear speakers mention, and we do experience it within our parks. So the example here is of elephants rubbing themselves against the trees. And sometimes they do not choose baobab trees. It's often the rock art paintings or the rock phase. So that's also another threat that we experience in the parks. And lastly would be environmental changes. So this is a site in Golden Gate that has since been closed due to its deterioration. Contact with water has led to flaking of the paintings. Through enhancement, you can see a bit of the outline of the paintings, but through the naked eye, it has badly deteriorated. Now, we do have some mitigation strategies we have put in place to protect the rock art sites. Part of them is continuous site documentation and digital recording. Something else that we do very often is make sure that there is controlled access and monitoring of the rock art sites. It is a bit easier in national parks where there are dangerous animals and predators. Most people do not walk to the sites, but with other parks where you can easily walk around, people do go to the sites. So we ensure through collaboration with field rangers that the sites are often patrolled, and it's made certain that they're not accessed unguided. And finally, it would be condition assessments and conservation interventions. Now, in dealing with wildlife as a threat, one of the mitigation strategies we have put in place is the placing of sharp rocks close to the rock art sites just to ensure that the elephants keep a safe distance and do not disturb the rock art paintings. All right. Now I'd like to move over to the use of rock art trails as a preservation strategy. It's a great way for visitor education and awareness. Most of our visitors go to the parks to see wildlife and the landscape. And if a park is popular for cultural heritage, it's less likely to be rock art. So rock art trails are a great way of exposing or promoting the rock art sites that we have to the public. We also have, it also helps with controlled presentation of those sites, and it reduces unmanaged access, like I mentioned in the previous slides. So the only time the public is able to visit the sites is if they are guided by someone who's trained and can control how the public interacts with the sites. It also lastly prompts regular monitoring and maintenance. While we do monitor the sites on an annual basis, it's still not enough on our side. So it's great that we have colleagues on the ground who are able to go there on a regular basis and report if there are threats that we might need to mitigate. So as I've shared, there is a case study that is a trail that we have in the Kruger National Park. It's the Bushman Wilderness Trail. So this one, it departs from a rest camp called Begendal, and it's a 3-night trail experience for the guests who do book it. It is guided by 2 guides, and like I mentioned at the beginning, we do train them and give them content on the best way of presenting the rock art to the public. And having 2 ranges, it also helps with controlling the visitors while guiding them through the rock art sites. Right, and it also blends both wildlife and rock art. So it's complementary for those who do enjoy nature, who would like to have close interaction with wildlife, and they can also learn a bit more about inhabitants who lived in the landscape thousands of years ago. As a conclusion, I'd like to have a look into our future directions. So first, it would be on the expanding of our digital heritage archives. We do have a comprehensive information management system where we use to document all our sites. I think for the future, it would be great to leverage digital technologies to add more information to the sites. That would be maybe 3D scans of our sites and maybe even virtual or augmented reality as a way of documenting the sites. Something else would be in strengthening partnerships and training. Now, last year, Dr. Ndlovu guest edited a volume on the Guru Journal, and it was to celebrate cultural heritage within our national parks. However, none of the papers were on rock art. So I do hope that, some of the researchers here would take up interest, or students or lecturers who have students would take up interest in the rock art sites that we have and study them for research purposes. Finally, it would be enhanced visitor education programs and site visibility. And this extends beyond the physical and actually going to the sites. SANParks developed a mobile app, and we're running a project right now where we are documenting and putting together site descriptions to add to the thousands of sites that we have throughout the country. So visitors are able to go into the app, visit, have a look at the heritage sites that we have. Those that are open for public access, they will have GPS locations and they can go and visit. And those that would like to prohibit access, they'll just learn more information about them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Do we have any questions or comments? We have 1, 2, 3.
Thanks very much. That was a great presentation. So you guys have developed a very large bureaucratic capacity within SANParks for the Cultural Heritage Unit. But the largest ground in South Africa under game reserves is under private land. Are you guys looking at expanding your services to private game ranches to bring this in? Because very, very little effort has been put into cultural heritage management on private game reserves.
I'm not too sure about that one, but with offerings of, for example, trails, private game reserves do also have similar offerings. So in that capacity, I'd say do work with them. But beyond that, I'm not too sure. Dr. Ndlovu. Yes.
Thank you. Just to add on that, you would have appreciated that SANParks has now come up with Vision 2040. And part of Vision 2040 is to make a reference to what SANParks has come to call mega living landscapes, so that we don't just focus our services within our national parks, but we look at a much broader region. So there's quite a number of corridors that have been identified, like the extending Ado, all the way up to Kamdebu, also around, Kruger and surrounding landscapes. So that idea is there, already. But, to move from an idea, to a practicality, is something else, because it also needs, as a significant expenditure, to be undertaken, while we are already having, our own challenges within the protected areas. So it is an idea, but how far it can be achieved within the next, how many years, 15 years to 2040, it is to be seen, but there is an attempt to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Boitumelo, for your presentation. Mine is more on, I think, interest. Just if you can share more information regarding the exhumation and the relocation of the reburial. If you can just talk more about the processes and also on the aspect of the community's involvement, if it's something that you did. And I think you mentioned it in some of your first slides. Thank you.
All right, so with this one, it was the first relocation I've done. And like I said, we were alerted by the field rangers and some of our colleagues who are working on the ground that after flooding, the grave is located near the river. So after heavy flooding, the bones were exposed and we were called in to facilitate relocation. A permit was granted for it, and under the supervision of Dr. Ndlovu, we did manage to relocate the bones. And with regards to community engagements, like I said, we do have several communities surrounding the different national parks, and we work very closely with them, like I said, in facilitating access into the parks, since they still would like to visit the heritage sites, and we also have a lot of graves within the parks where they'd like to go pay respects to their family members or their descendants. We also work with recording oral history around or with the communities. So them sharing more about what they know or what they'd like us to know about the heritage sites, their history when they were still living within the national parks, and so forth. So we work very closely with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I I'm wondering about the capacity. How you're working with a lot of parks, and how much funding and how much kind of respect, I suppose, within the whole National Park Service, which often seems to. I'm talking specifically about KZN, where the heritage seems to be ignored, and I think it's really exciting that it's what's happening here. So I suppose the question is, how many people are you, and do you have enough? And are you, like Nick was saying, are you speaking to the private people? But what about the other parks, the provincial parks, and putting forward what you guys are doing as a framework, I suppose, that other parks could follow? Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. I'd like to leave a big chunk of that to Dr. Ndlovu to answer. But in essence, we are a very small unit. There are 2 heritage officers, a cultural heritage officer in the Kruger, our manager of archaeology, and our general manager. We also have a senior collections manager who deals with the movable heritage resources, and a cultural heritage officer who assists with movable heritage resources. So in essence, it would be less than 10. Yes, responsible for, yes, for those 21 parks. But I'd like Dr. Ndlovu to expand on that.
Yeah, just to add to what Boitumelo has said, I mean, Gillian, you will appreciate that there's a Zemvelo in KwaZulu-Natal, and Zemvelo has got not even one person who is trained in archaeology or cultural heritage, and yet they are managing Ukatlamba Drakensberg, and they've outsourced that service to Amafa. But there's politics, behind why that is the case that I'm fully conscious of. Now, when you look at SANParks, even though we are less than 10, one of the things that I must credit our unit for is that if you look at the output of what we are doing, it doesn't correlate with the number of staff that we have. In actual fact, Boitumelo and Lufuno were only appointed last year. I think you've just been over a year now. And that clearly shows you, if you appreciate the amount of work, we are doing. Now, one of the things that is helping us, is that there is interest inside the organization, to give support to Cultural Heritage Unit. Because in the past, I wouldn't say, colleagues generally appreciated the existence of the unit. But now that we are there, we have been pushing beyond boundaries, and colleagues have, been very much warm to that. What is also helping, I don't know how many of you appreciate that, in each and every park has got a park management plan, a 10-year park management plan, and which specifies what needs to be achieved on an annual basis. And park managers are scored against those targets. It's called MET scoring. So one of the things that made park managers, and I'm generalizing, to be anti-cultural heritage, was because they were always underscoring, because those targets were not even set by them, and those targets were not even set by people who understood cultural heritage significantly. So they were just setting targets based on what they've heard, and managers were forever failing, on their scoring, and then they became anti-cultural heritage, if you can say so. But now that we are there, and we are making them aware that some of your targets are actually very wrong targets, and they are unneeded targets, they are now appreciating that their scoring is improving, scoring specifically on cultural heritage, and the parks are now performing, much better. That is still work in progress, but there is now that general collegiality. But what is also happening is that all the management plans that are being put into force during our tenure now, we make sure that those 10-year targets are practical targets and they are achievable targets. And that is also helping to improve. I mean, I was just looking this morning, we have 4 management plans that will be done next year. So Karoo, Tankwa in Northern Cape / Western Cape, I think Namakwa as well. But there's 4 altogether. So that gives us an opportunity as the unit to actively participate in those management plans and drive, the scoring, going forward and improve that mentality within the organization. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. I think some of what you've just spoken to probably speaks to what I'm about to say. But so I've been working with the Komani San since 2006, and I was based up there working at an NGO between 2014 and 2017. And the Komani San have various rights in the Kalahari Transfrontier Park, ranging from cultural, symbolic, business rights, and own part of the heritage park. And what seemed to happen is over the years, different managers have different priorities and different ideas. But now you're saying with the management plan change, ideas change, and hopefully that will have changed. I think things have improved in the last few years. But really, when we were there, the community really battled to access the park at all. And whenever we put ideas forward, there was always a reason why we couldn't do it. So things have improved, but the feeling is still that so the general idea feeling is there with the community and people that have worked with them over the years is that SANParks are very regimented and stuck in their ways. And if the community can fit into SANParks' way of doing things, there can be community engagement. But if they're not willing, if the communities aren't willing to bend to fit SANParks, then they really can't, access the park in the way that they want to and use it for the way they want. As I say, in the last 5 years, things have improved, but considering the rights that the community have in the park, that's an opportunity for SANParks to really leverage that as well and use that to encourage tourism. And it's not really, there is since the Royal Heritage Site was declared, there is now an interpretation centre. But for about more than 10 years, the community wanted an interpretation centre and didn't have one. And there's still no really, the idea that it's a quote-owned park is really not really well advertised. So hopefully with the new management plan strategies, things can improve in the future. But I think it's also a missed opportunity for SANParks. But I do agree that the community are very difficult to work with, but sometimes the feeling is that more effort could also be made.
I have 2 questions. The first one for the heritage trail you mentioned. What are the figures? If you have some numbers of how many visitors are doing this. And the second question, perhaps more for Ndukuyake. How do you explain that SANParks change step by step and are more interesting about culture? I imagine it is your power of persuading them, but perhaps there is another reason.
With visitation numbers, I am not certain about them. It's actually something I've noted down that we do need to keep up with how many people visit the sites or how many people book for the trails. So usually what we do on our side is in capacity building for the field guides, and then marketing and tourism take over in putting together the tourism products for the guests. So it's something I'll need to work on in the future.
Yeah, if I could just add on, and I'm going to be very straightforward here because of a recent case study, I'm dealing with. We have serious cases where researchers engage communities and they are told stories, and community members express their frustrations and all of that. And when they are non-existing, give an example without mentioning a park. 2 weeks ago, a university professor writes to SANParks, as an activist on behalf of the community. The very same community that he has not sat down with to ask for evidence, to say, if you say you are writing to SANParks, you are being ignored, can you give me proof of the emails? If you say you have meetings with SANParks and nothing is happening, give me proof. Without asking for that proof, he came down lamenting on us. I then thought, let me engage with the park manager just to make sure that internally we are also not found wanting. And I had plenty of evidence. Unfortunately, I had been to that park. Unfortunately, there was a community member who made a very rude statement in the meeting and walked out. And I wanted to find out if that particular person was not the one who has been engaging with the researchers. And to cut a long story short, in this particular instance, I could very easily prove that we are being misrepresented when we've got evidence to prove otherwise. I'll give you another much more frustrating case study, and this involves my own PhD student who was writing, and maybe I was playing a biased picture because on one side I'm a supervisor, on the other side I'm a manager within SANParks. But my student had also done interviews with certain community members that I engage with on a far regular basis. And it just took what was being said to him. He was not critical, in engaging with that data. And I started asking him some of the questions, not because I'm defending SANParks, but showing, practicalities to say, don't just take what people are saying to you flatly, and then you run with it. Give SANParks the right to give you a different story. So one of the things that we have done is our gates are open. But obviously, Boitumelo mentioned one issue about security matters within the parks. Not all parks are open parks. Like Golden Gate is an open park. You drive through Golden Gate without even knowing that you are now entering the park or you've exited the park. So one of the issues, communities think because we have arrived at the gate, we must just be allowed access to go to our sites. No, it doesn't work that way. You must ask in advance so that a vehicle that can get there is allocated to you, so that a game guide is there for your own protection against the predators and all the large mammals that we have. But people don't want to subject themselves to that at times. They just think they've got a right to come in as they please, which it doesn't work that way. And lastly, Melanie, I think it's about the fact that we have a general manager who has got many years' experience in the field. I've worked with him for over 20 years, and I think both of us, have credibilities in our different disciplines, and therefore we are listened to with respect. When we express, the direction, that SANParks needs to go in towards, and it's working very well. Just last comment to add on what Boitumelo was saying, and there was a question about the rescue excavations, to do with human burials. It is not very easy because at the very initial stage, we need to get a South African Police Service member to go to the site, because SARA demands that when we apply for a permit to relocate a found grave, we need to have proof that it is not a criminal matter. Now, can you imagine how far some of our parks are located in relation to police station? So it becomes very difficult to get a police officer, to drive all the way to the gate of the park and to drive inside the park to that destination, and to actually then write and say, indeed, there is no criminal matter here. These are just old bones that you can do as you please with, pretty much. So we are sitting with one case right now in Kruger, where it has been over 7 months, for example. and erosion is not waiting. So these are some of the practical challenges we are having with legislation, in addition to the point I highlighted yesterday with regards to landscape. That is nice to declare something as a landscape, but as a manager on the ground, it's the most frustrating experience because of the legislation that we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just pass the mic on to our last question.
Thank you, Boitumelo, very much for the beautiful presentation. Thank you for taking good care of the national parks in South Africa. I have maybe 2.5 questions. One is to do with, you mentioned the community engagement. I would like to know, perhaps, from the side of SANParks, what is it that is community engagement mean? And what is like the rationale for being engaging in the community engagement activities, and what's in it for like communities? The second question is on, you touched on there's one of the threats or some of the threats, environmental changes. What are those changes perhaps, and their impact on the rock art sites? And lastly, I want to also thank you for inviting us all to do research in the SANParks. And so the question is perhaps, what kind of support do researchers or those that are willing to work in SANParks sites get from the park or from the organization? Maybe researchers, established researchers and students as well, because we also have got students like who will be doing their honors postgrad, but not knowing about the availability of these sites where they can do their research, and also in processes involved for one to be able to conduct research in SANPark properties. This year in February, I think it was 28 February, we were denied access in terms of research when we went to Komani because of maybe procedural activities. We had not followed the right procedures. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. With regards to the last one, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Ndlovu, as he sits on the scientific committee and reviews applications. With regards to the first one, like I mentioned, community engagement forms part of the core of the work that we do as a unit. Like I said, most of the sites that we manage and protect are related to neighboring communities. So those would be descendants of some of those heritage sites. You also have instances where loved ones, like I said, family members of some of the people who have been relocated to the surrounding neighborhoods have been buried within the parks. So the biggest thing for us is in facilitating access to those heritage sites, as well as facilitating some of the rituals that they'd like to do on those sites and on the graves that they visit. I think the second question was based on environmental factors, changes as threats to the rock art. Yesterday, we had a presentation on climate change as a factor in the preservation of rock art. And I'd say from my experience, what I've seen with some of the sites that we have, extreme heat and flooding also contributes to the degradation of the rock sites that we've had. I had an example of a site that has since been closed. On the rock face, the surface of the rock face has been flaking over time, contributing to the deterioration of the rock paintings. I'm not sure if that would answer your question.
Yeah, just to be brief, colleagues, Boitumelo highlighted the fact that we edited we co-edited a special issue of Kudu last year. And the whole idea was just to, give a significant profile, to the heritage that exists in our national parks. And disappointingly, you begin to see that there is big bias towards Mapungubwe, maybe for obvious reasons, and also to Kruger. I think over 80% of the papers come from those two parks. And then we've got one along the Garden Route, which is a paleosciences paper, and then one on Tankwa, which has to do with the built environment. What? Well, David was meant to write one. David Morris was meant to write one for what to call color, in terms of the engravings, but due to circumstances, it couldn't, materialize. But what I'm highlighting here is that the central part of the country, going up to the north, as far as archaeological research is concerned, within our national parks, there's almost zero. So what are we doing to change that? I'll give an example of a project that we have supported, and I've seen the benefit, and I want to use that as a case study, right across our national parks. A project was identified. There was no funding, research funding. SANParks came on board. We provided seed funding, so that at least, accommodation is covered, within the park, without the researcher and the team, having to incur any cost. We also covered, their transportation, to the park, so that they don't incur cost from that matter. All they were doing was to bring their skills set, and their time. That project is now funded by NRF, because NRF has now obviously seen the good reasoning behind why it's a good project. And it's a case study I want to replicate, particularly in the least studied areas. And I'm in informal talks with some of the researchers around that. So if anyone is interested in doing research, especially in the least studied areas as far as archaeological period is concerned, we are having our doors open. You can talk to any of us there. And lastly, with regards to the project that you referred to, I would not be very defensive here, but to acknowledge that, it was just our internal, issues that led to you being frustrated. In fact, there was a lot of misunderstanding regarding the project you had proposed, in that particular locality. But on the other side, I've been trying very hard to get in touch with the PI of that project, so that can be corrected, and he's running away from me. So I'm trying to help.
Thank you all for this very informative discussion. Can we please give a round of applause to the presenter?